One big no-no in the early days of online poker was the protection bet that people would scoff at the idea of betting to protect your hand. You know, you've got a vulnerable top pair type hand. Um, you, People would say if you've got a strong hand, you should just be trying to get value from it. You don't want to turn your hand into a bluff. I think it's say a lot when you're betting too much with a strong hand. Nowadays, it's okay. We're allowed to do it because we've renamed it denying equity. um, but the solvers have taught us that protection actually is a thing, and we'll have a look at an example of that now. So back to the low jack opens, big line defends. The flop is 9-6-4 rainbow. This is what we call a polarized range for the low jack. They check most of their medium strength hands, and they bet quite large with their value and their bluffs. And what we can see here is two distinct types of bets. We've got the large bet, the overbet, 125%, and then we've got these two smaller bets. And um, different hand classes are choosing to employ the different bet sizes. For example, pocket tens to pocket kings almost exclusively, pocket aces also, but a little bit less so, almost exclusively uses the overbet size. And this is for value, Dara, but this is also for protection, is it not?
Yeah, we used to talk about bets as value bets or bluffs, and that is too binary a concept. Bets can achieve a bit of both, and for example, if we bet ace nine suited on this board, our opponent can call with worse hands, a
Mhm.
six, a four, or all the draws. So it's a value bet against that portion of the range. But if they fold something like king queen,
Yeah.
we're not bluffing, but their king queen had a lot of equity against us. Um, so we're getting them to fold out that equity. That's why it's a better term than protection, because protection implies we have the best hand and we are trying to protect it from getting drawn out on. But denying equity just kind of recognizes that even if we have the best hand, there are still hands that we benefit from folding.
Mm.
And that's kind of the dual purpose for betting. We bet to get value when we have the best hand, but even if we have the best hand and our opponent folds, that's often a very good result for us, unless we have a super strong hand. And you'll see that with the super strong hands, for example, pocket nines, um, we either bet small or we check because it's harder to get called by worse hand when we have two of the nines and there's
Yeah.
one on the board. And we don't really benefit as much from when King Queen folds, for example. It
Yeah.
had very, very little equity against us. So that's a much better way to think about it in terms of purely I'm value betting this hand or I'm bluffing with this hand.
There's also a second class of hands that bet, um, and it's the ones who make the small bet. Now, obviously, we've just seen pocket nines, a very, very strong hand. It's small bets or checks because it doesn't want anyone to go away. But there's other hands like 6-5 suited makes a small bet. In fact, we can look at this tab and see what the most common bets are. It's mostly one pairish hands, ace high, which is often the strongest, still the strongest hand at the moment, makes a small type of bet. And this is a different type of equity denial, which I call trash removal. And the purpose of a bet like this, Dara, right, is to just make people fold weak hands that have some equity against us.
That's one useful side effect, but there is another thing too, which is like when we use a big size, our opponent needs a strong hand to continue.
Mm,
So the bigger our size, the stronger hand they need. When we bet a small size, they can continue with weaker and weaker hands.
mm,
So therefore, when you use a small size with a hand like 6-5, that allows more of the weaker hands to actually pay us off.
Let's have a
Whereas
look
if
at
we,
the call-in range when we
yeah,
make a bet with 6-5 suited.
yeah. So when we bet with 6-5 suited, for example, no four folds. So all
Yep.
the fours are calling. Lots of ace high calls. Obviously all the draws call, but even stuff like king high is called as well. So we're actually getting value because we're using that small size. I remember once I was playing with an old school player who only ever used really big bet sizes on the flop, and obviously he mostly won. But after a while, the player behind him turned to him and said, "Did it ever occur to you to make bets that people can call with worse hands?" And that's a very important concept. When your value when you have a value hand, when it's a very, very strong hand, obviously you can bet big and get called by worse hands. But if it's a fairly mediocre hand, if you bet big, all the worse hands are going to fold. So that dual purpose of a bet, it doesn't work on that side anymore. It's not working as a value bet anymore. It's only working to fold out hands that have equity. So you want to try and keep those two things going when you have a hand that has equity. You want to allow opponents to continue with worse hands, but also to fold out hands that have equity. And the small bet kind of achieves that. It'll clear out all the trash. And a hand like 6-5 suited is far more vulnerable than pocket tens. So
look,
benefits
yeah,
more from it.
Yeah, I mean, we do there's two good things happening. As you mentioned, like ace five suited continues on a board like this, and 6-5 suited is performing very well against that, obviously. And we're also clearing out hands like queen eight off, jack eight off, which is also a good result for us. We don't particularly want to be up against those for another street most of the time. This is the final thing that I wanted to bring up, and it's not the biggest lesson, perhaps, but this was probably the biggest game changer for me in the last 12 months, and that is betting your best draws all the time is actually a mistake. We all like semi-bluffing, but semi-bluffing with our absolute best draws is often a mistake, and we should be our backdoors a little bit more. There are better hands to bluff with. This was a game changer for me, and I think it's probably best to summarize it with an example. One more time, low jack against the big blind. The flop is 8-2 rainbow. The big blind is checked. And polarized situation, as we mentioned before, Dara. Half the time we check with a hand like with a flop like this. My instinct for an incredibly long time was that if I had 10-9 suited, we don't have 10-9 off in this situation, but if I had 10-9 suited or 5-6 suited in this situation, I come out blasting. This I would say, look at me, I've got an open-ended straight draw for the 10-9 suited, my 10 or my 9 making a pair might be a good situation, and I would be looking for any excuse to check raise with a hand like this, or check raise all in, or bomb the pot, or whatever. But if we look, it's actually not a very frequent bluff, nor is the 5-6 suited. More common bluffs are things like queen 9 suited, queen 10 suited, king 9 suited, king 10 suited. Most of the time, this would be when it's suited in the with a backdoor draw. So what's going on here, Dara? Why is it a mistake for Barry to be going crazy with the open-ended straight draw, but why should he be going a little bit more aggressive with an overcard and a gut shot and a backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw like king nine suited would be?
Okay, let's think about what happens, what could possibly happen when we bet, and we'll compare how two hands perform. Let's say 10-9 suited without a backdoor flush draw, and king 9 suited with a backdoor flush draw. So when we bet, let's say we bet and our opponent folds. Well, you might say, okay, well, that's equally good for both hands. But actually, it's kind of better for the king 9 suited because the 10-9 suited had far more equity. That had the ability to make a really strong hand. Maybe we were going to make a straight on the next card, and if our opponent was still around, they were going to pay us off. So it's actually a better result for king 9 suited when our opponent folds than for 10-9 suited. Let's say they call. Well, again, we might hit our straight on the next street, and that's great. But unless we hit our straight, we don't, or one of our pairs, we don't really improve. So we only really improve on a jack or a 6, maybe on a 10 or a 9. with the king nine suited, we can make a super strong hand on the next street, but we can lots of cards improve us in some way. A 6 or a 10 will make us open-ended. A 5 or a jack will give us a gut shot, and one of our suit will give us a flush draw. Additionally, if we hit our king, that's far more likely to be good than, say, 10-9 suited if it hits its 10. So there's far more good turn cards for us, and that allows us to keep bluffing more often. And that's kind of a crucial concept to understand. That's why solvers love using 3 to a straight, 3 to a flush as bluffs. It's not so much that we make a super strong hand by the river all that often, but it's that we improve so often on the turn on far more cards that it allows us to keep bluffing. And then the third part of the equation is to consider, well, what happens if they raise? Well, if they raise, it's no big deal with king nine suited. We can just junk our hand, which has very little equity. But with 10-9 suited, we're in a messy situation now. We have a lot of equity. We might have the right price to call. We might not. We have to make that calculation. And even if we have, we've created a very big pot in a situation where now we know we have to hit. If you look at what happens when, let's say, we use the big size, which the solver wants to use here, 125%. Look at how the big blind responds. The big blind is folding king queen off, king jack off, king 10 off, all those types of hands. So if they call and we hit our king on the turn, we've essentially promoted the king. It's more likely to be good now because we folded out so much of their king X. Whereas, you know, and that's referred to as promoting pair outs. Now compare what happens if we check. So when we check as the low jack. Okay, so when we put the 10 up, our opponent has hung around now with all their worst 10s, 10-2, 10-3, 10-4, 10-5. So our 10 is actually stronger than if we bet and got them to fold all those hands. So that's the other side of the equation. It's referred to as preserving pair outs. When you bet a hand like king 9 suited and they fold most of their king X, now you've promoted your king to an out that if you hit, it's likely to be best. But if you bet a hand like 10-9 suited and get them to fold most of their 10s, then if you do hit the 10 on the turn, it's less likely to be good than if you had checked.
Yeah. This was a big one for me. I was particularly making this error with the nut flush draw, and yeah, I found that I would sometimes get myself in a nightmarish situation where I check raise with an ace high flush draw, hit my ace and then get myself into trouble with it. Whereas if I played the hand passively, the ace is much more likely to be good. And also, you know, this doesn't mean we have to play the hand passively, the strong semi bluff passively, for the rest of the hand. I found a lot of success by playing the big semi bluffing type hand passively on the flop, but then being quite aggressive when I don't get there on the turn, because it's just it's much less likely I'm going to hit my hand, and it looks much stronger when it's on the turn.
Yeah, remember what we said earlier that you should have hands that call flop, call turn, call river, call flop, call turn, full river, call flop, full turn. The same is true of your bluffs. Like you should have hands that bluff flop, bluff turn, bluff river, bluff flop, bluff turn, give up river, bluff flop, give up on turn. But you also need hands which don't bluff the flop but start bluffing on the turn. So often these type of strong draws, as you said, they make much better turn or river bluffs, because if you get to the river with 10 high, you know you have the worst hand, and you have a very simple bluff. If you have, let's say, a gut shot on the flop and you bet it and get check raised, now it's a kind of a gross situation. You're folding away a fair amount of equity, 2 chances to hit your gut shot. But if you wait till the turn and your opponent still shows no willingness to put money into the pot, it goes check on the flop and then they check the turn. Now your gut shot, there's only 1 card to come. It has only half the value that it had on the flop. If you get check raised with it now, it's not that big a deal. You're folding away a lot less equity. but and if you bet and get to fold, it's a much bigger result for you. So some hands should be held back to be bluffed on later streets.
You mentioned we've said a few things throughout this course, and for people that don't know, like the crux of everything in poker, as you've recently made me realize, is equity realization. We want to be able to realize as much equity with our hands and stop our opponents from realizing equity with their hands. Can you, to someone who's never heard of this term, can you very briefly summarize that? Because it's a very important thing, both in this video and in all the other content that we create, right?
Yeah, this is probably the crucial central concept of poker. If you're playing in a game where everybody gets to see the river all of the time, then everybody's just going to win whatever percentage of the time their hand is supposed to win. But what makes poker different is people can put bets in which force people to out of the pot, or to put money into the pot when they're not getting the right price. So for example, like let's say a flop comes down and our hand only has a 20% chance of winning. Well, if we're playing against somebody who's very passive and isn't going to bet, and is going to let us see the river, guess what? We're going to win the pot 20% of the time. But if we're playing against somebody who's more aggressive and he's going to bet and we're going to have to fold, now we're not going to win any of those pots because we have to fold on the flop. So and similarly, if you're the guy with 80%, you want to be doing the betting. If they call with 20%, that's great. You're going to win that money 80% of the time, that extra money that went in. But if they fold, also great, because guess what? Now you've gone from winning the pot 80% of the time to winning the pot 100% of the time. And that's essentially what we mean. Players who realize equity more when they have, say, 20% will win more in the long run. And players who force other players out when they're the ones when they have the 80% equity themselves and their opponent only has the 20% equity, are also going to win more. So they will win more than their fair share of pots.